So you've obviously had I would say your family culture has been quite, maybe we could say chaotic, is a fair way to describe that. How do you think that shaped the way that you see and maybe have dealt with others in the past?
I would say it definitely made me not want to get close to people a lot because I just got so good at learning how to take care of myself. And independence is a big thing.
Right. And then maybe, we'll get into this in a little while, sometimes we lean into it too much. And we become so independent that when we actually need the opportunity for others to help us, we will not allow them to. Your experiences growing up, they're one aspect of who you are. They are not who you are. We're allowed to, I would say, take those experiences and transform them in a way that serve us moving forward. Well, you've gone through a lot of actually what I was initially wanted to talk about, but I want to ask you another question on that idea, because this might somewhat tie into your family dynamic, because you obviously have a very interesting one. So I always talk about culture and how that shapes the way that you see people in terms of perception, right? So you've obviously had I would say your family culture has been quite, maybe we could say chaotic, is a fair way to describe that. How do you think from that perspective of what you've witnessed, and since you've been in therapy, maybe you can give us a little more insight. How do you think that shaped the way that you see and maybe have dealt with others in the past?
I would say it definitely made me not want to get close to people a lot because I just got so good at learning how to take care of myself. And I got so comfortable being with myself. And also I think a big thing is because I was always in the giving role in my family and no one ever gave back to me, I'd find myself in those same dynamics with friends, family, people I was dating.
Very one-sided.
Everything. Very one-sided. And I would find myself just at this point where I'm like, I am being so used right now. And then I would get like really mad, and I would just stop talking to them. Like someone who I've known for so long and been so close to and who knows so much about me, I'd be like, nope, we're not talking anymore. I've also found myself having a hard time connecting with like a lot of or certain demographics of people. I'm getting better about that as I get older, but I think when you're young and you're like an adolescent, you have that like spotlight effect, like, oh, they don't get it, like, you know what I mean? So you see people. I think another thing is genuinely, I had a really hard time connecting with people who were my age.
Do you think that had to do with the fact that you were surrounded by so many people in your house that weren't?
I did have a lot of people who were older than me, but I also felt like I didn't have much in common with them. I feel like my lifestyle was very different.
I could see that.
Yeah, even now I still kind of find myself facing that in just different ways, where it's not so much about, oh, what have you been through? But I think for a while, going back to what you were saying, there was this issue of finding somebody as I started to mature and learn better coping skills and finally heal from everything I went through, because I was able to do that a significant amount. For a while, it was finding people who I felt like understood me or could validate like my experiences. And a big part of that was like who understood me, similar experiences, like that in itself made me feel close to people. But also finding people who had the kind of lifestyle I wanted for myself, because I knew that's not what I wanted. And a lot of the people who I knew, who I surrounded myself by for a while when I was younger, who went through things like what I went through, they weren't doing very good, and they were not a good influence. And as I started getting into my academics and got older and realized that now that I'm not in my house anymore, I can really make anything out of myself that I want. Those people weren't serving me, because all they wanted to do was party or the things they talked about or the way they carried themselves, and I didn't want that for myself. But then when you surround yourself with people who don't understand that part of you, especially in the transition. It's not like that now because I don't identify with all of that as much as I used to. Like, it's part of me, but it's not the most important part of me at all.
Correct.
But I think at first it was hard because, you know, especially when you're like in a group and everyone's telling funny stories about their childhood, and you're like, oh my God, one time my mom did this, and everyone's like, like,
I don't know if that's funny.
No, they're like, I can't laugh at that.
Like, that was funny to me.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting how that happens too. I think when you talked about being able to relate, I think I can relate to that if this rings true for you.
Mm-hmm.
I found that I had to be a lot more mature growing up,
Mm-hmm.
especially when I got into high school. When you were saying about how you were performing academically, that's how I was. I like just excelled. I tried to put my head down and just, my father was very much like, be a good student. And so that's where majority of my focus went into, was just performing as highly as I could. So then you kind of didn't really have a reason to look deeper into like what I had going on, like beneath the surface. Cause you're like, oh, this guy's doing fine, clearly. And, but I think that it doesn't lend ourselves to sometimes connect with others that are in our age group, because maybe some of them had the fortune of kind of just being a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us don't. You know, we have to do that process a little faster than others, which I think it's safe to say, based on what you've said, you had to do that a bit more quickly, because you talked about these elements of being a nurturer and somewhat of a provider, and trying to help support your older sister in terms of childcare with your nephew, in terms of trying to help out with your mom and not being a burden, you said, onto her. Even as a parent, right, I would never want to hear a child speak that way. You're a burden. Yeah. I don't want to be a burden to him. Like, I'm your parent. You're not a burden to me. That's my job. That's what I'm here to do. But then you're saying, no, you're not. I don't want to put that on you. So that speaks to me in terms of you feeling like, I have to assume this more mature role because I can't put all this on you. So I'm going to make sure that I can be more self-reliant.
Independence is a big thing.
Right. And then maybe, we'll get into this in a little while, sometimes we lean into it too much. And we become so independent that when we actually need the opportunity for others to help us, we will not allow them to.
Mm-hmm. I'm getting better with that, but that's definitely something I struggled with. But I think another thing is for me personally, it wasn't just about, like, there was no one influencing me to do good in school. That was thing number one. Like, there was no one who checked or cared about what I was doing, or as long as I wasn't getting called home about failing. Yeah, I don't think my mom would have cared too much, because she was like, you know, you can get a B or a C. She didn't help me apply for colleges or do anything like that. So that was all me doing that. Okay. But I think for me, school kind of turned into a coping mechanism, because I wasn't good with friends or making friends or keeping friends or group dynamics. I wasn't good with my family, and I had a hard time connecting with them. I had my 2 cousins that I was very grateful for. I think they helped me through a lot. Yeah. But other than them, I wasn't really able to connect with anyone. But the thing is, with school, is if you don't get the job you want, or if you get a bad grade, or you fail that test, or you don't get into that program you want to get into, that's on you. Right. That's in your control. Sure. It's a control thing, because now what I'm putting all my self-worth in is something that only I control, and I don't have to base it off of other people's reactions or how other people interact with me. Because especially when you're in a period where it feels very, like, everything feels very fleeting. Like, you have a good day, but tomorrow could be one of the worst days. Like, when that's what your interactions you're used to, you don't want to depend on people or put your happiness or self-fulfillment in those kind of relationships. So you put it into school.
Absolutely. And that's why I gave you the comment earlier about what I said that I did, because I absolutely was using school to cope, because it gave me that sense of fulfillment, because I was getting praise from teachers and administrators that I wasn't even getting from my own father. So that made me feel good about myself, despite what I didn't feel at home. That's also why I brought that up, because I had a feeling when you were touching on that was something that we had in common. And yeah, you're basically describing the idea of autonomy. So you're getting to that age where now there's things that are within my control that I do want to exercise, because all these other things that were outside of my control that have shaped me up until this point, you know, all I can do is try to focus on, like, how do I respond to them? But this school thing, I can. So I'm going to maybe put maximum effort into making sure that this part of my life is stable, which I think is not a bad thing. It's okay because you're right. That is the one thing that you control. But what we're talking about is sometimes when we over lean and overcorrect onto one thing, and then, like you said, if my self-worth and my value, let's use this as an example, as an exercise. If my self-worth and my value is 100% maybe, or 90% attached to my performance, and you get a B, and you're not used to getting B's, how you think you're going to respond?
Not good. I actually, that happened to me last semester, and I like started crying about it. I was like super dramatic. I was like, oh my God, I'm a failure. Because I like took on a lot last semester. That's another issue is once you do that, you start filling up your schedule a lot. So I was like doing an internship. I was on the board for a club. I was a teaching assistant. I was taking 17 credit hours. And then I got a B, and I was like, I'm a failure. And I was like, I'm not ever going to be what I want to be, like things like that. And it was just so dramatic. It was a B plus.
See? But to your point though, but if I'm saying that most of my value comes from my ability to do this, and I've been good at doing this, then right, you're not really giving yourself the fulfillment of being a complete person, right? I'm saying in this one nuanced category, that is me. This is the metric in which I measure myself, right? That's why I can give this, I can break this down to you in this way because I've had to do it. And I understood, and I've had to understand, that's one aspect of who you are. Just like what I heard you say earlier, your experiences growing up, they're one aspect of who you are. They are not who you are, just like they're not who I am. Because we're allowed to grow. We're allowed to evolve. We're allowed to, I would say, take those experiences and transform them in a way that serve us moving forward. So what I have done is take a lot of those experiences that I've gone through and try to fuel them into my clinical work, or in being able and willing to have conversations like this with you for us to be able to connect in a very authentic way. So it takes pain, and it can lead to connection. It can lead to resilience. It can lead to us being willing and able to overcome adversity, right? But the first step is I got to acknowledge it. I have to process it. I have to sit in it, and I have to deal with it, right? So that I'm no longer prisoner of that time and of those memories. So moving forward, I'm truly not going to ever leave them in the past where I'm never going to think about them, but it lessens the impact in my life. And again, all these other new things and new experiences I want to do, I might take some life lessons from them and I might apply them into my present. But for the most part, that's not going to be how I see or identify moving forward. Would you agree with that statement?
I agree.
Okay. And I just say that because I think sometimes people over-identify with their trauma, and they might limit, we call them self-limiting beliefs. So you might put that on yourself and say like, well, I'm never going to be this because this is how I started, right? We have no control of our life and who we get born into and what that family dynamic is like. That's why I say everybody's normal for their family is unique. It is not normal across the board universally. But we are more than that, right? I appreciate you so much for sharing everything that you did, but you are more than that. I know that, regardless of whatever your academics are, because I was the same. But it's also trying to discover, okay, then if I'm not that, for some people, then where do I derive my value? Where does my worth come from? How do I, because maybe nobody taught me. Maybe my parents didn't sit me down, sit down, Amanda. Let's talk about how I love you and how I'm going to validate all these experiences that you've gone through and affirm how strong you have been and how caring and considerate you are as a daughter and how you've tried to step up for us, which I thoroughly appreciate. What happens when you don't have that and I still want to have healthier relationships with people, right? I got to learn that from somewhere, which is why I talk about therapy, because I don't know where else you're going to get that if you don't have somebody to kind of mentor and guide you. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm kind of lucky enough that I've always been like a very I'm very honest with myself. So I'll call myself out when things aren't working. And I also think I grew up watching a lot. Like I was very observant of what was happening around me. And I think it's because of that. There was actually a lot of my own things that I was able to kind of work through and learn how to cope with on my own before I started therapy.
Okay.
So, but that wasn't something I was able to get from my parent. But I think it's more so the hardest things that for me to get past after everything I went through was letting people in. And also, I think a big thing was not focusing so much of my life on school to the point where it was driving me absolutely crazy. Because actually why I started therapy when I started it was because I got really stressed out about everything I was taking on, and I lost a bunch of weight and I was having health issues because of it. And it was just because like I was so busy and stressed about everything I had to do. I was also moving from one place to another, and my mom lives 20 minutes away from me, but I've moved myself like without familial support both times I moved out. So that was stressing me out as well. And I also just, it's my senior year of college, so I'm actually graduating this summer.
Okay.
So that was also another thing I had to think about. And with all of that, that's kind of what pushed me to be in there into therapy. So
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think to me, support goes underrated for a lot of people, and particularly when you don't recognize that when you don't have that growing up, that again, that over reliance on self. So this PSA is more for the men, but I'm not going to say this doesn't apply to women, but this is more for the men. We tend to over identify with this idea that we must pick ourselves up and we must make it through life on our own, unencumbered by help or assistance from anybody else. Women, in my experience, women don't tend to have this issue. They're much more willing to ask for help and take it. Not saying all, but many. But men, we don't tend to do a good job of that. And I'm trying very desperately to impress this point upon all of you that might believe that to be true, that that is a lie, and that nobody makes it through life without help to any degree. And it's important for us to recognize that when we need it, we must ask, and then more importantly, we must accept it. Because there's absolutely going to be moments where we can get overwhelmed. Even the best of us. I consider myself quite a resilient individual. And there are absolutely moments where you can hit breaking points because life can just hit you with too many things at the same time. Even the most well-adjusted and emotionally regulated person, I'm going to point this at myself, can be in that position. So it's very important that we have a circle of support. So when we need these folks, we know where to go, and we will actually welcome that assistance from them. So that's just one of those things that I try to always impress upon the audience and anybody who might be listening, because I know there's people out there that don't think that's true. They think they're supposed to just make it through, suffer, struggle, grind, and it's just going to work itself out somehow magically. And I'm like, that's not true. You're feeling like maybe you're dying on the inside because you don't have anybody to have that outlet to. You don't have anybody you're talking about your things to. So you're just keeping everything, again, like we talked about, all bundled up. And then what do you think is going to happen over time? You're probably going to explode on somebody, and probably not the best way.